Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week we're celebrating 15 years of mind-bending hilarity that is Portal 2, arguably one of the best sequels ever made from not only Valve Software, but just in general speaking. You know, a sequel that, as we'll be discussing, took the very strong but still, the bare bones of the original game and kind of elevated it in a way that all these years later has made it still an exemplar of how you can expand upon a sequel's world in more ways than one. But before we dive into the feature for this week, a bit of housekeeping. As always, be sure to check out the previous week, or in the case of Horror Bites, now being bi-weekly, an episode from 2 weeks ago in terms of checking out the latest episode of our Indie Horror Showcase, Horror Bites. And we have this new themed approach. So last time it was aquatic horror, which Neil had picked. And this week we'll be debuting a new episode of Horror Bites with the new theme that I've picked, which is religious horror. So be sure to tune back in on Thursday for the latest installment of Horror Bites, which I'm going to bring a game to the mix. Neil's going to bring a game, and typically we pick things that kind of tackle that theme in drastically different ways. So be sure to check that out and whatnot. But Neil, how are you doing this week?
Yeah, a little bit run down after a busy week, but on the upside, got to go and see both Suspiria and Akira in cinemas this week. It's a real swings and roundabout week. And got to play Portal 2. So, yeah. So on the balance of things, probably just shifting into the positive. So.
Yeah, we spent about an hour before recording of me just expressing just how truly jealous I am of your latest cinema viewing. But as you said, we both got to spend the week revisiting Portal 2. So we're on equal playing field there in terms of what we've been playing and whatnot. But yeah, for the case of me, like, even though having a long weekend, an extremely long weekend, which is not typically the case for me, like still feeling run down from just like life logistics and trying to find time to run through Portal 2. But we were both able to do it. And it's going to be great to kind of dive into this sequel that I think this was only the second time that I'd actually played through it, which is surprising to no one given my track record with keeping up with, some of the best games ever made. But you kind of have had a bit more experience with replaying Portal 2 and what this means to you. So like for you, whether it's sentimental or otherwise, like how does Portal 2 stand as a sequel for you in terms of your sort of like gaming history?
It's a weird one because is it weird? It seems to be this common theme, I think, with a lot of like video game franchises where I either get to the first one late or like well after the hype and excitement that's been around it, and maybe don't like it as much as I think I will, and then the sequel just is amazing to me. I mean, this happened with Resident Evil, as I've discussed before, where it's great, but 2 was the one that really did it, and I did it with Streets of Rage 2. I think even Metal Gear Solid 2 to a degree, only because I came to the PlayStation a little late, and and then just other stuff more recently. It like Uncharted, and I mean, I think it's kind of universal that Uncharted 2 just blows the first game out of the water anyway. But there was a lot of stuff like that, and this was another one because of where Portal came out and being an Xbox thing, and didn't have that. So obviously there was that whole thing of Valve not making games on PlayStation 3 because of PS3 being a bit of a clusterfuck to do stuff for, which meant we sort of missed out on some big games. But Portal 2 ended up being like the exception, where quite amusingly Valve promised that from now on we'll be able to make games for PlayStation. That worked out wonderfully, as you know, because they didn't really do any games. So and then when they did, not for the kind of hardware that you would expect. But so it was kind of a surprise. I got to play Portal anyway. In the meantime, like I said, found it a quite fun experiment, cool idea. But like I said, even in the early days of the internet, sort of memery, that game was like the meme, other than fucking Skyrim would be that in the same year Portal came out. And yeah, so I did not expect anything like that. But I was saying to you before, like, this ended up being like the big game I finished before my son was born. And like, as my daughter was MGS5, where I started that around that time. And yeah, so it kind of held as being like this last game I played through before having kids fully, effectively. So it was like, it sticks out in a lot of ways. It's quite odd, but yeah, it was. I don't know. The game just kind of blew me away in terms of how it went about its puzzles and stuff, and the storytelling. And since then, having other consoles, I've ended up buying it again on PC, buying it again and playing it again on Xbox, and this time I played it on Switch, for it as well. So because they had the Portal games on there. Bizarrely, of all the consoles that have had a port since, it's the Switch. But yeah, it's just something about it. Like, every time I come back to it, I've forgotten enough about it that the puzzles feel fresh. And you just get back into the rhythm of things, and it's different things about the storytelling. But we'll get into all that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I'm very nostalgic for the Portal series because of the fact that it was a game that came out of nowhere for me, to be honest, because of the fact that, as I've talked about plenty of times, like, I've always been a massive fan of Valve's games, as many people are, but like, my love of their games stemmed from, naturally my exposure to Half-Life 2, and then going back and playing through the original and the standalone expansions. But like, I think a decade of my gaming experience from my adolescence was spent playing Counter-Strike, Day of Defeat, Team Fortress Classic, naturally Team Fortress 2. And so, like, when the Orange Box came out, Portal was the thing that I was looking forward to the least. And, that is what it is. But at the same time, like, when you are talking about Valve and their games, it's kind of like, yeah, I was still looking forward to it, right? It's not like, it's kind of in a different camp of its own in that regard. But, I was looking forward to playing Half-Life 2 Episode 2. I was looking forward to playing Team Fortress 2. And so when I finally made time for Portal, despite all the sort of like fervor online and all the, pop culture aspects of it and the cake is a lie and all this types of things that were literally unavoidable back in 2006, 2007. The game still took me by surprise in terms of it being yet another example of Valve just being like the exemplar for storytelling. And I think that, again, like, their approach to storytelling has always been straightforward and simple, but it's been refined to this like level that eludes so many different games and different companies and these things because of the fact it is so straightforward, and yet it just feels so finely tuned. Like, Half-Life is not a complicated story at all. A lot of the characters are not complex in terms of their motivations and these things. However, like, they just so perfectly know how to like, not only direct story and dialogue in games, but the like exact junctions within their experiences when the story needs to be front and center in a way that like doesn't distract from the actual gameplay of it. And so like that was one of those things with the original Portal that was so remarkable, was that you could have this game that was portrayed as just being a puzzle game. However, it would have these little moments of storytelling or alluding to something larger that's going on, or these bits of humor with, of course, GLaDOS and whatnot, and along the lines of the cake is a lie, these types of things. But like, it always felt like it was at the exact right moment, that it never detracted. It gave you just a little bit of greater context for what you were doing that stopped Portal from feeling like just a series of challenge rooms. Now, the game would have been amazing regardless if it didn't have those aspects. If it did just feel like a series of challenge rooms in this weird facility that utilizes this amazing physics portal technology. But it's like that extra little polish like is so indicative of what Valve used to do so well. And, you know, like many, I'm hoping that one day they'll return to that, though not overly optimistic. However,
yes,
with something like Portal 2, you know, there's me ranting on and on about the original, but like with the sequel, I came to it years and years later, and to see them abide by that, you know, bigger and better methodology for sequels. However, it's doing that for a Valve game, which is just like furthermore speaks to like, yeah, they completely capitalized on what they already did so well and expanded on it, but avoided ever like being overly distracting with those narrative elements and whatnot, which there's much more of here, but like I said, not to a distracting degree.
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? Like, I look into everything about this game and the development of it and just think the idea that they wanted to re-surprise players, having, you know, Portal being what it was and being such a short-form game by comparison, but having such a novel idea that did seem like kind of mind-blowing in what it was doing. It's like that was the challenge, that they wanted to try and push this sequel that would do more creatively, and this was the thing that Valve at its peak was good at. And, you know, it's probably no surprise that, you know, in the aftermath, as they were coming towards, the end of development, like where they kind of realised that what they had on their hands, and, you know, you had these offhand quotes from like the Gabe Newell basically saying, "Yeah, I don't think we'll do anything single player focused again, you know, because this feels like it's the best thing we'll ever do," sort of thing. It's like. And you can get that. And I think that's the great achievement of this game, is just that it does all these things that so many sequels do. Like, and yet in some games it would be annoying and maybe feel like it's pandering and giving players too much information about stuff that didn't need to be told. But it does it in a way that is just so... It just taps into that great storytelling that Valve had done, you know, like in Half-Life, you know, in this game especially, you know, you've got this impossibly large tomb of aperture, you know, shown in these really small and effective ways. Like, you know, we get to learn, you know, it's built in a salt mine, you know, and then everything was sort of built on top, so that's where the cavernous space of it comes from. But it's like, it still just feels impossible at times. And then there's sort of like story hook of like, it's a long time after the events of the first game, and therefore, given that it's in the Half-Life universe, probably a long time after the events of those games.
Yeah.
So, you know, inadvertently ends up being the closest thing we had to a sequel to any of that. And yeah, I mean, that was always the dream after this, was that we would have some sort of game that was both things at once.
Right.
But yeah, it's really difficult to look at it and go, what could Valve have done beyond this? You know, like, the problem they had with Half-Life is the same problem they had with this. It's like, where could you go? What could you do? Yeah. There are story beats here that you could, you know, certainly in like the co-op campaigns, they kind of tell you like an epilogue of this story that suggests what you could do. But at the same time, it's just like, everything about it just stands out compared to the games of its time in terms of how it's being, you know, a game first and foremost.
Yeah.
How it structures a novel concept from the first game and makes it better, and how it takes storytelling in a way that, as you said, is very simple, but, you know, it has layer upon layer of depth to it. And I think probably the most crucial thing, and the thing that's probably hardest to do in so many video games, it's fucking funny consistently. Like, different kinds of humour throughout with this game. You know, from Wheatley to GLaDOS to Cave, they all offer these sort of different varieties of humour. You know, like, it would all feel of, you know, of this world and of the sort of a style, if you will. But they're all different kinds of humour. You know, like, and it's just, yeah, a game that I just revel in hearing the dialogue for every single time, and it's never not funny. Like, it's just, I mean, GLaDOS was always the the highlight, obviously, of the original game. And like when she's reintroduced in this, it's like it's the same all over again. It's just like the pithy, now grudging one-liner she comes out with to Shell, is are just ridiculously fun. But but having the addition of Wheatley, having the recordings of Cave Johnson voiced by J.K. Simmons is just like it just feels like the complete package in so many ways. It's like, and while you could say, well, hey guys, this is supposed to be a horror game podcast, and it's like, in the same way that Half-Life could be covered, because of what it does and doesn't do, and you have there's all sorts of things within it. You can look at this game and go, yeah, it's a genre game, and much of a horror genre, we don't mind dipping into genre. And for something like this, from a company that has produced some of the great horror and sci-fi horror moments in games with Left 4 Dead and the Half-Lives of this world, it's very much a part of that too. It's more, there is some sort of sci-fi horror and sort of dystopian nonsense going on in here that's really interesting. Like I said, that depth beyond of what's these little backstories and like the sinister nature of like the company and the quite inhumane things it did to get to this point. It's there's so much to it that you could sort of explore in that regard.
No, absolutely. Like when you stop and actually like think about the narrative of this, it's like, this is as much of a mad scientist trope as there ever has been, right? The fact that furthermore, once you get to those later sections that feature, as you said, J.K. Simmons' character, Cave Johnson, you learn more about Aperture, the company, the people that were behind it, the things that they subjected test subjects to. I mean, that's even alluded to in the opening moments when, you basically wake up all these years later to the degree that the facility has been, from the original game, has been overrun in GLaDOS's absence after you defeated her. And, there's all this vegetation and wildlife that's taken over it. And basically the new character, Wheatley, who's voiced by Stephen Merchant, rescues you or wakes you up out of your hibernative state. And, you see that there's a never-ending rows and rows and rows of those chambers filled with test subjects. And when you're getting this sort of like rescue gliding through the facility, you see that on the sides of those shipping containers, which, seem endless, it labels like whether the test subject in one of those is male, female, or their build, is it a child? Like, it kind of just furthermore, the game's approach to like sinister, dark humor is still addressing like the toll that all of this has taken, and kind of like the lack of, restraint on the owners of Aperture Science. And they're just kind of like, they're just mad scientists. They're willing to do anything and everything to kind of like find their, achieve their goals rather. And you get a lot of like humorous bits when J.K. Simmons pre-recording is like talking about like the toll it's taking not only on individuals, but on himself. And yet he still continues to, subject people to these test chambers, and they're continually developing new manners of, otherworldly powers like that would inevitably become the portals. But you get to see the growing pains there and the kind of like human cost that went into devising all of that. But I guess like keeping it in line with like talking about the humor of this game, like the one thing that I found to be very refreshing is how Portal 2 avoids being overly referential, right? Outside of a couple of instances offhandedly mentioning like GLaDOS recognizes you. Naturally, you're playing as the protagonist from the original Portal. There's a great deal of animosity there between the two of you as you quite literally killed GLaDOS or thought you had killed GLaDOS. But like they don't harp on, the cake is a lie, that type of a thing. They move on from that line of humor or pop culture reference, which it would become. And they really just like lean all into the strengths that were there in the original, which would be, Ellen McLean, who voiced GLaDOS and the turrets, and at this point also like voicing Caroline, which we learn about the origins of GLaDOS. But then, you get Stephen Merchant, who plays Wheatley, who is your basically compatriot almost for the first half of the game. Before that takes a narrative twist. But the game, I think, just does such a great job of infusing a new injection of humor in a way that even for Valve was surprising, because it really does kind of like reinvent itself for a game that's twice, if not 2.5 times longer than the original, which is an incredibly challenging feat. And yet, you know, as usual, Valve rose to that challenge and more than succeeded at it.
Yeah, I mean, it had to be done, didn't it? It would be bigger. I think with the 2 campaigns as well, because the co-op campaign is almost as long, basically, as the main one. It's deceptively big like that. And I think it's the intricacies of what they put in there as well. Again, enough one of those things that in many other games you would look at it and go, well, that's just recycling, you know, what we've had before in slightly new paint. And there's this drip feed, basically, of the new, where you get familiar stuff at the beginning, you know, like a rundown version of what you went through before. And then on the reawakening of GLaDOS, basically getting a slightly revised version of what happened before. And then it switching again, you know, when obviously you get into the cavernous bottom of the old version of Aperture and doing these experimental things, you know, with new technology that to you. Like, it just keeps doing these cool little refreshing things with the established formula, like, and tying it to where you are in the story really nicely, and it just makes everything work more. The knowledge you gain from everything you do, like, sets up that finale beautifully in terms of like where you portal to, in the finale especially. But yeah, it's just. Every time I come back to it, it is ridiculous how well it does that, and how it just keeps basically getting away with like doing like, okay, we're basically starting the game again, but and here off, and you could if there wasn't a story, you could see how you could break something like this into the chapters they are, you know, especially if you do like the challenge run there. But you know, you can just like do a level, see how quick you can do it, sort of thing. But it's just how it feels like this whole seamless story thing at the same time. It is just one of those marriages of like making sure the game is a really great game and doing really great storytelling, and not making them feel like they are competing, but like really are symbiotic, you know, in terms of the storytelling. And I think having it in, you know, these games in Half-Life universe just means that whole concept of like fucking with science and doing weird things with it, and in this case really for just really odd reasons like that, is just, and the results of that being like you get stuff like a portal gun, which I think the revelation of it in this game being like, well, you know, it's here because we were testing things and you kind of just need one to be able to make these tests work, sort of thing, especially as you go down into like the ruins of the old Aperture sort of thing, and you find that like it is really preposterous. Like, oh, they made all this great tech, but they used it for such stupid means, and it's like, yep, that tracks. You know, like that is like the almost a timeless idea of like how science and technology and improvements to everything, you know, with something good in mind, can just be used for something so fucking stupid like that. And yeah, like in a game with a murderous AI, it's quite funny that's you had that whole story about like the deliberately dumb as fuck AI being like the counter to the way things should work properly, sort of thing. Like, it's like,
right,
yeah. I mean, I love that in itself. Again, that just, it was funny coming back to it this time with the whole sort of furore we've had of the way AI is used and for useless things. It was like, yeah, I like the idea of that. Just like, here's a personality core AI that is just basically, yeah, designed to fuck up and stupid and makes the intelligent being stupid.
As usual, Valve comes across as being fairly prophetic in that regard in terms of just like the commentary here. And I think, you know, a testament to the writing of Eric Wolpaw, Jay Pinkerton, and Chet Faustic, because it's genuinely like a hilarious game. But again, like it comes down to the level of restraint. And I think that something that we've talked about a lot, probably off podcast mostly when we're talking about horror movies or just movies in general, is like comedy and humor is one of the hardest things that you could do in entertainment. Doesn't matter what the medium is. And for this to be a game that is so funny 15 years later, and yet it feels like just when you might think like, oh, okay, they've had a good amount of laughs here and there. And again, thinking about the original, I suppose the sequel and how long of an experience it is. And yet you get just enough of each of the characters' injection of their personality and enough of the humor that goes along with those personalities. And yet just when you might think that it's going to be just a little bit too much or interject too much, it just backs off right at the exact moment. And again, like I think that again is so indicative of Valve's understanding of just like how you can make compelling worlds and compelling characters, but they have this wherewithal that eludes so many people. Because, if you try to make a list of like games that are actually funny a majority of the time, I don't know, it's going to be a pretty short list. And I feel like a majority of the games on it are going to be from Valve because of the fact that, they have this wherewithal to, pull out before it becomes too overbearing and whatnot. Like, I think for me also, like the injection of humor, and I want to circle back to like the use of environments in this game, which you briefly touched upon. And I talked about it a little bit in my intro spiel, but like it could have been very easy for them to release a sequel to Portal that just felt like, again, a new series of challenge rooms, right? Which would have been as impressive in terms of, the logic, the use of physics, the mind-bending nature of utilizing portals and all of these different techniques to make a puzzle game that's unlike anything that came before it. For me personally, like I wouldn't have loved that because of the fact that like I love to have a narrative. I love to have characters in a world, no matter how fleeting or how few, because of the fact that it just like it gives me extra motivation to keep going. I'm not somebody that's incentivized to keep playing a game because of like, oh, I want to keep pushing myself to see if I can do this challenge or that challenge. And I think that, the utilization of the story and the characters here, but also like the use of environments, keeps this from feeling like a challenge mission pack in a way that like it, I suppose in terms of the environments, maybe it's like almost an illusion because it is just a bunch of new puzzles and challenges, but like changing the environment feeds into the narrative aspect here, which ties into the history of Aperture. You get to go through the previous decades from the 60s to the 80s to contemporary era. And those older environments that act as like a history lesson almost, they have and introduce new aspects to gameplay, which would be the gels, right? Because you've got the three different types of gels, which are the bouncy gel, propulsion gel, you've got the gel that when you walk across it, it makes you move a lot faster. And then there's like the white gel, which basically acts as a canvas to make portals anywhere that you want to. And like all of that is facilitated by those new environments that are indicative again of that history and whatnot. And I think that furthermore, like the game beginning with the overrun Aperture environments of test chambers that you're used to from the original game, like that conveys a sense of time passing without sort of like beating us over the head with a lot of additional exposition. So this really is like an example of environmental storytelling that's done in a way that is so seamless and concise in a way that you might not be expecting for a game that again is, about 7 to 8.5 hours in length, depending on how stumped you might get.
Yeah, that's it. It does depend on that very much. So you don't want to, like I said, that's one of the things. Coming back to the game, I always find out that I forget so much about certain things, but in terms of like the actual puzzles themselves, even though the environments are memorable, and I always like, oh yeah, I remember this bit and this bit and this bit, but like, yeah, the puzzles themselves like do take a little time to sort of come back in my head, and there'll be some where I'll be like, how do I do this one again? But yeah, again, like you get into the rhythm of things, and just the beauty of it is you get into the rhythm of it just as something new comes along, and now you're like, okay, so I work with this, and I think once you start getting all these extra bits and bobs to it, like some of the things you actually do, like intuitively because of everything you've learned, just like it's one of the most satisfying puzzle feelings around, in terms of just like when you basically chaining together a bunch of moves and doing it that way because you've learned all these different skills and using this without ever giving you much different tool in the way of tools to use yourself. You are still essentially just using the same tool you had in the first game. And yeah, it's like it's a masterclass in just like giving you things to do and like at the right time, and like ensuring that you never like, okay, yeah, this is just what I did before. I'm done with this now. Like no, it's like here comes a new bit. And we're talking about like the humor. Like it's almost quite a meta take on what the game is doing. That you every sort of thing test you complete, that it's a little dopamine reward you get is like having a funny line at the end of it, like that. I noticed it more like in doing like the challenge runs of like each room,
Yeah.
because obviously the dialogue's still going, and it, of course, you're trying to get out there fast, so you don't get to hear all the dialogue, and it reminded me how much I would finish the level, and rather than go straight into the exit thing to go to the next one, I'd wait till the dialogue was finished, even though I've heard it multiple times, because it's like, it's funny, it's good. And yeah, especially in the early ones, even before GLaDOS or Wheatley really arrived properly, and like you just have like the narrating voice in the background, just the announcer, just like doing stupid things like the here's some smooth jazz sort of thing, and like just it's going wrong. But like there's just so many cool bits like that, aren't there? Like GLaDOS, like the way she just starts poking at Shell in terms of like the whole I got a surprise for you, like, and hinting that it'll be your parents, like, which is preposterous given like we know a long time has gone and all that at the very least, but it's going to be a joke, and it's just just like, and then, when it's revealed that it is just a joke, and of course they're not there. It's like, yeah, sorry, not that they would have cared anyway, because they abandoned you as a child. So like that stuff like that, just the cold cruelty of it is just great. And I think one of my favourite early ones is just like the whole thing where she sort of remarks about loud noises, like like that, and just you get that train horn out of nowhere. I was like, oh, I don't know why that happened, sort of thing. Just like this, yeah. There's just so many bits like that.
That's the thing. Like, again, I keep harping on about like the restraint here, but they do a great job, I think, of reintroducing GLaDOS, having the introduction of Wheatley, and having that switch where your ally becomes your enemy and your enemy becomes your ally at that certain point in the story. But like they plant these little seeds where initially like Wheatley is this goofy, lovable ally who then becomes drunk with power, but then there's this notion that like, oh, Wheatley was always this moron, and despite the fact that once he becomes essentially the new GLaDOS, he still feels like he has to prove himself to not be a moron. So like at one point he starts GLaDOS, when she's your ally who's been fused with the potato that you put on the end of your portal gun, she basically calls him out on being an idiot, and then he comes back into one test chamber later on and starts talking about how he's listening to, like Mozart, and he's flipping through pages of like some philosopher's book, and like there's these little seeds that get planted early on that then get followed up on with various jokes and things like that later on. And I think the one section of the game that I ended up liking probably the most was the Cave Johnson section again, like the founder of Aperture, who's voiced by J.K. Simmons, and like just seeing his trajectory and basically fall from grace, if you will, and the fact that he begins with these delusions of grandeur that he keeps pursuing, despite the fact that like he even says at one point, like invokes the name of Black Mesa is kicking his ass. He loses all of his funding, and yet he's got this test facility that is infested with asbestos, and yet he sends all of these test subjects basically to their death and starts screaming about when life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade, make life take lemons back. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like, it's such a great use of characters that I think without kind of like giving you that break from the characters you're used to and interjecting with brand new characters allows the longevity of this to like go on far longer than I thought it would in terms of like the humor aspect. And I think changing up the environments as well. Again, there's such a great job of kind of like prolonging this, that by the time you return to the contemporary Aperture setting of the test chambers and everything, it doesn't feel like just a natural return to what you're familiar with, because by that point you are introduced to new facets of the test chambers that previously were not there. And maybe if we take a quick break and when we come back, we can delve into some of those aspects of the test chambers that get shaken up this time around, that add a great deal of new challenge, but at the same time don't feel completely out of touch, I think, with like Aperture that everyone is used to at this point. But yeah, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dive into those features and some more. And we're back from our break, and some of those features that I was talking about in terms of like shaking up the general test chambers and whatnot would be these like gravitational force fields that you get, where they will either push or pull objects that enter their gravitational field. You also, even though it's not necessarily incredibly groundbreaking, but like at one point in the game, you mess with the turrets, and then the turrets and the basically companion cubes get melded into one, and so it gives you these like demented bastardizations of the companion cube. So they've got like turrets that basically like make these weird noises and try to crawl away and whatnot. But like little touches like that, I think again like continually take that core concept of mechanics that was there in the original Portal and just kind of like make players have to rethink their sort of understanding of those mechanics. And as we said, with like the gels that are in the older test facilities, like it's such a fantastic way of incorporating old school with new school, but at the same time it complements rather than kind of like rewrites the framework of Portal's gameplay and whatnot.
Yeah, like I said, it's like there isn't like an escalation, so to speak, in terms of like how these new things happen. Like I said, you're effectively going back to the experimental past when you do get to the gels. Like the puzzles you face there are rudimentary. Like the design of the rooms is from an older time period and very much more in ruin than the newer stuff, which is, GLaDOS has control over at that point. And all these ones don't have a direct control. They are basically automated tests as a result, hence why you have the recorded lines. And it's cool that you sort of get to have that experience like from a different time period without it being like doing a time travel thing or something like that, even though there is a joke about that in there from Cave Johnson about one of the puzzles might involve time travel and you shouldn't interact with your past or future self sort of thing. But then even when you do get back to it, and where Wheatley's obviously gotten hold of like Aperture above and like has started making his own stuff, and like I said, it's that whole enshittification thing, like where he is just doing the worst job of everything, but they kind of work and don't work. And like there's that whole joke of like him setting up this puzzle and how dastardly it is, and it's like you missed a really obvious point like that, which almost feels like a jab at like badly designed puzzles in games. Like it's just like that. It's like, yeah, okay, but here's a not really obvious solution sort of thing. Like this is what happens when someone who doesn't understand how these things work makes something like this, like that. And yeah, I mean, even down to like when Wheatley has his whole idea of like a deadly surprise, which is to trap you and kill you. It's like it has like a really obvious out sort of thing. It's like, again, it's so different, and then you kind of get that wild swing at the end, in terms of how it changes things. And yeah, it's just constantly doing different things without like going like, oh, now it's even more futuristic, or like it's like rebuilding the game and revisiting its past in different ways. And that's something I found just utterly fascinating as a storytelling thing as well. Just use it at the right time to, delve into the past of Aperture whilst also doing the past experiments from it, like that, as because it's the only way to get back out again. And yeah, just it's amazing how on every level it works. Like just like visually, like audio in terms of audibly, and just mechanically, all of it. It's amazing to make stuff feel fresh whilst being like retroactively not, if you will. Like, because I said stuff from the past, stuff that doesn't really work because it's being done by a moron. But it all works within the context of the game.
Yeah, and that ends up being the aspect that I think allows it to be so fresh feeling for a sequel. Again, like I talked about it a little bit earlier, is the fact that it doesn't feel overly referential, which I think is really the only way that you could kind of like tackle a sequel. Not that I would think that, that would be Valve's approach with something like this, but I think that overall, like they build upon and bolster the aspect that is at the core of this, which is like the puzzle mechanics. However, they still have those fundamental aspects that like give Portal its real drive, in my opinion. And I think it's an aspect of the storytelling that's so strong here, which is that environmental storytelling that I talked about. Because more so in Portal 2, you have these larger environments, and in those larger environments, you have these like discoverable nooks and crannies that don't necessarily like flesh new details about what is going on and the mystery and all the secrecy behind Aperture and the relationship with Black Mesa, but it just gives a little bit more flavor to the world. So you'll find these nooks and crannies that are clearly where other test subjects basically held out for a while. You'll find like very early on, you'll find like graffiti scrawlings on the wall that illustrate, their sort of understanding of the facility thus far, or shows you that, they were able to derive at least that like GLaDOS is the one doing all of this, or this is the purpose, maybe their sort of like hypothesis about what the testing is for. And you get just like a little bit of flavor text there, and you'll find like cans of food sprawling around, or like a radio or something. And like, it's not earth shattering in terms of the revelations that provides, but I think that overall, like those little things give more personality and credence to like wanting to explore the world more than just like getting to the next test chamber. And I think that like, again, when you talk about the puzzle mechanics that are introduced, the further that you progress, whether it's like launch pads, whether it's the hard light bridges, which I think are like a really terrific addition, in addition to like the gravitational sort of force fields that we talked about. These new mechanics like build upon it in a way that feels very natural. And I think that, that notion that you are traversing further into a facility that you have a history with and you thought you had a mastery of, you're like, oh, I've only scratched the surface in the original game in terms of what they were devising, basically. And I think that is probably one of the best compliments you could give to Portal 2 in terms of like Valve's ability to build upon what was laid with the original, is that it's like, oh, well, you want to make it feel like this is this grandiose, never-ending facility. You can do that in ways other than just like, hey, here's 1,000 more test chambers. It's like, no, the further you get into the facility, the more you can see like their advances in technology and the ways in which whoever the masters that may be at the helm of all of this are kind of like further trying to torture their test subjects, I suppose.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And obviously, where GLaDOS had taken over in later times, in the post Cave Johnson era, like it's quite fascinating to see that the original was basically buried underneath all this stuff above it, and how it's been. I mean, even when GLaDOS comes back initially and starts rebuilding the facility, it's like that nice subtle change from like how stuff starts to look better, in terms of the testing rooms, and you just see like her putting bits and pieces of it back together when you come in. And yeah, it's again, great little storytelling moments in the tiniest of details. Like just say, whether it be just like, oh, you'll notice those gradual changes in the rooms as she asserts more power and understands what she's got, sort of thing. But yeah, it's but even like on a story level as well, like the whole GLaDOS thing could have just been very tired if it had just been, oh, okay, so we're back up against GLaDOS sort of thing. But yeah, that sort of swerve of like, okay, we're going to depower her, but then Wheatley gets corrupted by the idea of having so much power, and GLaDOS then becomes a potato battery effectively, and you have that whole sort of reluctant buddy cop thing going on, like in the bowels, where she starts to understand who she was and things like that. But and how that changed, even the writing, how that changes GLaDOS' sort of personality, to a degree, where because she doesn't have enough power to run. She makes the joke about like I don't have the capacity to lie to you because literally the sort of thing. But yeah, it's like that's the thing my daughter remembers about that game. Every time she sees it, she just turns around and goes, because I'm a potato, sort of thing, like that. She just remembers that line delivery and how stupid it is. But even the way that's set up, like just before it, where you go through the whole, take your kids to work day thing with like all the potato battery things, so like a Wheatley, like just scoffing at the idea of them, despite the fact that he's dumb as a rock anyway, like that. And then of course him sealing GLaDOS to that fate because that's what he deems as stupid. But then you get that nice little story nook later, like when you're going through the old Aperture, where there's like awards from like Idaho for like for doing potato-based science, like in potato batteries, or like, so it was kind of important, like that. It was for the character, for the story, like that. So whereas Wheatley sort of stupid, it's like it's kind of like saying, well, no, the very basics of like science, they can do this, like that, and the difference of what a machine thinks is stupid for some reason, and what the marvels of science can be, even at like the most base level. It's like, yeah, it's like, and there's just some small thing that you notice, like by playing it again. So, and yeah, lovely little stuff.
I guess I've never had any experience with the co-op aspect of that. Man. For like, could you fill me in a bit just on like what that adds to the overall experience in terms of whether it's gameplay or like the narrative aspect?
Yeah, I mean it's a little bit of both. I think historically they had wanted this to be a co-op game to a degree, but they were going to do that with Shell and another human character, but opted to do robots instead. It takes place after the events of the game. So obviously after, we'll get into it quickly here. Obviously, in getting Wheatley out, they send Wheatley to the moon, which, like I said, is, and GLaDOS basically decides that after all they've been through, she doesn't really have the energy to want to kill Shell anymore, so she just gives her freedom, and you get dumped out on the surface, and dumps out the companion cube with you to sort of as a little joke, that sort of thing. But which is a very small glimpse we get at the surface. But GLaDOS finds these robots for testing, like, and that's the story. Is like that. She's kind of happy that she's got something to testing, and so you and a partner play as these robots, and you can use voice chat, but it has like a bunch of like basic like pinging systems and like emotes, and it's a great idea. I can see why they wanted to do it in terms of and do a co-op story, because GLaDOS is happy to have these robots and for having the option to test again, but then realizing over time that as much as you can destroy them at the end of every test, it's like, and reassemble them, it's like they don't die. So there's a boredom in that for her because she's homicidal, and so basically eventually she just does get rid of them. So you do get a nice little story hook in that, where basically the hook of it being like in the end of that story that thing you see at the beginning with all the other test subjects out there, the robots end up finding those test subjects, and she decides, GLaDOS is happy, gets rid of the robots, but then there's like a secondary story where they get reactivated, because it's like a saboteur basically that going in the facility and messing stuff up, and she sends them to investigate, and it's just a payoff of the joke from the main game with the bird that tries to eat her when she's a potato, like finds out that it's the bird that's causing problems. But it's interesting in a story because basically she then, instead of she shoots the bird away, they shoot the bird away. GLaDOS is happy for it, but then there are eggs left behind, and rather than be homicidal on this one occasion, she takes the eggs to rear as her own like killing machines, effectively, like that. And it's like that is basically the end point of the entire Portal 2 story. And it's just like I found that immensely funny. That like what's been going on in like the week or two since she initially killed them, like when she's like all this has happened. But yeah, and given like some of the strengths and changes she's gone over in the main story, even though she says she's like deleted the Caroline part of herself, at the end of the game, like clearly it's just another GLaDOS sort of lie, in terms of like, no, it's like she's not really lost that bit of humanity she's found. There's something in there still, even if it is in the idea of just finding something that could help kill things.
Well, I hope at some point I'll be able to dive back into this and co-op. Thankfully, I have a hard copy of it, so I can play with somebody maybe locally. Local co-op, I think, is probably going to be my best bet.
Yeah.
Considering we've shared the woes of online multiplayer plenty of times on podcasts.
Yeah, there's some good like modded extras as well. Like you can get like Portal Revolution, which is out there. Which, apart from the fact that it crashed the shit out of my Steam Deck multiple times, it is like does have some fun like continuations of it.
Nice. Well, I'll. And it looks like as of recently as this week, there's a new mod called Portal 2 Community Edition, which is like a maintain. Let's see, I'm just going to read it right off the Steam page because this popped up. Community maintained version of Portal 2 that significantly enhances the way you make and play content, offering new capabilities, new scripting, improved editor, and significantly increased limits over the original game. Good Lord. Can you imagine improving upon the puzzle physics and whatnot that are there already? But no, I think that's kind of like the perfect way to wrap up our chat, and just speaking to like the framework that was introduced with Portal 2, and clearly all these years later, like there are few games that are able to rise to Portal 2's not only acclaim, but the level to which that sort of like Portal physics gameplay really just like far exceeds so many other types of games in terms of like just pushing players to like think about the various ways that you can make new challenges in this world with these variables, and at the same time like utilizing the things that made the sequel not only an improvement over the original, not that the original like was desperate need of improvements, but just more so like getting your brain to think about puzzles in this new fundamental way that was introduced with the original.
Definitely.
But this is not the only Valve game that we're going to get to celebrate an anniversary for this year. We've got Half-Life 2 Episode 1, which I haven't played in probably as long as it's taken me to get around to replaying Portal 2. So that'll be something to look forward to later on this year, and just kind of getting to tap back into the aspects of Valve's approach to game design that really made them a name way back in the day before they were more concerned with, I suppose, marketplaces and whatnot.
Well, yeah, it's about time they make a new one. Running out of Valve games to talk about at this point. So.
Yeah. Well, one of these days I'm going to, probably the Steam summer sale this year, I'll pick up Half-Life Alyx and download the No VR mod. But we'll see how that goes and everything. But no, I was happy to have the opportunity this week to chat about a Valve game that this is only the second time I'd ever played it, and it's one that it sounds like I'm going to need to replay again, this time in co-op and whatnot. So I was glad we had the chance to do that.
Yeah, it's been grand to talk. Always wanted to talk about this one, so it was nice to have a reason.
Absolutely. But yeah, as a last reminder, We will have a new iteration of Horror Bites this week, which is going to delve into the new theme of religious horror. So be sure to tune back in on Thursday. But until then, my friend, as always, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Back at you, my man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's main feed episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as this helps us immensely in ensuring that the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes, at Safe Room Pod. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.